Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're talking to Matt and Cassie Foshee about what it's like to pioneer NoPlaceLeft in the Mormon heartland of Utah.
So I was 28 when I started following Jesus, and Cassie was 31, I think it was. And we were really going the opposite direction prior to God just really interrupting our lives and opening our eyes. And so there was a lot that came with that for me. I would say pretty early on, I felt like just a deeper level of call from God to give more, like sacrifice to serve him. But I feel like in the context that I was in, I struggled to know how that fleshed out, because the things I would hear people say about ministry and what ministry looked like, it didn't sound appealing to me in some of those facets. And I later came to realize it was part of the reason was because of how God had actually wired me and how God had wired us. You know, I would say I didn't even have a lane. I don't feel like I had a true lane to run in. And then I came across, I'm guessing it was 2015 or 2016. We heard some stories of what God was doing in an area of North Carolina, and heard that there was a guy there that was seeing people come to Christ, and they were doing something called 3/3 and walking people through obedience-based discipleship and the commands of Christ. And so we just started doing that in our church. And I just started groups, tried to start sharing the gospel, making disciples. And probably a year into that, came across a training that took place in Raleigh, North Carolina, and which once we saw as a Four Fields training. And through that process, God just lit our hearts up, and we knew it was what we wanted to give our lives to.
So what was it about the training that had such a big impact?
I think it was actually seeing the pattern of Jesus in his life and ministry, and then seeing that pattern actually carried out in the book of Acts as well through disciples and through the churches that were started in the book of Acts. That was really impactful for me. And I think seeing how the same God that was working then is actually the same one that's working now. And we could be a part of what he was doing in the same way that he was doing it then, So it really, I think that was a big piece of it. And the vision itself just really, really, the vision of every place and every people. I feel like our heart has always been for lostness and really for the gaps, and I just feel like that was a big piece of that training as well.
So I was in the midst of major child rearing. I was pregnant and had really, really small children. And so I actually didn't go to the trainings with Matt, but he would come home and just share in excitement. And I was excited about that. But honestly, I really kind of struggled as we started forming our team to come out here to Utah. I really felt really clearly that God was calling me to something really specific in prayer. And I don't know, I feel like I was just really wrestling with that, because I almost felt like that was insignificant compared to everybody else's giftings and just the way that God had wired them. But I really pressed into that as we moved and just saw God do just some amazing things. And I don't know, I just really grew in just my identity as who God made me to be. So,
Great.
Yeah. And actually this week there was a lady that I grew up in a small church, and the pastor's wife you heard Matt say that I didn't come to faith until I was in my young 30s. And the pastor's wife, she prayed for me for decades for my salvation. Wow. And I really feel like God used her prayers to save me. And she passed away this week. And I don't know, I feel like that was just a huge legacy that she passed on to me and to so many others. And so,
Right.
yeah, I feel like God just really, brought me from a place of, I don't know where I fit into, wow, this is actually really a significant calling.
Mm. And how did that call to Utah come?
So we actually came on our honeymoon out of all places to Utah, southern Utah. They have some awesome national parks here. And so we came out here to do some hiking. And while we were here, we were both fairly new believers at the time. Cassie was probably an 8-month-old believer, and I was maybe 2 years as a believer. And while we were on our honeymoon, we had a lot of gospel conversations with people and came to realize that this was a different place than where we grew up because of the Mormon influence. And we were just really, in a lot of ways, ignorant to what even the Mormon faith was. And as we started sharing with people and they would share with us, we recognized that the things that they were sharing weren't in the Bible. And so we just asked them, hey, where are you getting that from? And so we actually, through that process, they said, hey, here's a Book of Mormon. This is where we're getting it from. If you'll pray and sincerely ask God, he'll reveal his truth to you. And so we took the book from them and we started praying. And within 15 minutes, God just put a passage from the Bible on Cassie's heart from Jeremiah chapter 23. She had actually never read Jeremiah. So we opened it up and we started digging in. And the first 8 or 9 verses was a prophecy of Jesus and the righteous branch whose name would be called the Lord is our righteousness. And then the whole rest of the chapter was denouncing false prophets that dreamed vision and they promised peace to people. And that was really like wrecking for us, honestly, because it was at that moment we realized what was taking place in Utah and how it was connected to lostness. And, over the years, God moved us shortly after that honeymoon. About 8 months later, we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where we lived for 6 years. But in 2015, God just started bringing Utah back to our hearts. We kind of left our honeymoon thinking this might be a neat place to do ministry one day. And, little did we know God called us back here years later. So we moved with a team of 7 adults and 9 kids at the time. The 9 kids were 7 and under. There were actually 4 1-year-olds. And we actually moved out and lived in the same house as a team, all the adults and the kids in one house for 7 months. Yeah, that season was really formative in so many ways because, we're moving out here. We knew a few people, but by and large, we were what we had, and by God's grace, you could come out of a season of 7 months like that, living with people, and you could see it could go one or two directions, and for us, literally those people are our family now, and this is I would say through that process, this is the first season. Like I always read in the Bible how church is a family, brothers, sisters. In my mind, I think I connected it to being like family. This is the first season I've been able to say, this is family and actually, so when we came out though, we were sowing the gospel really broadly. So as a team, we were spending 35 to 40 hours a week in the harvest, sharing the gospel 75 to 100 times a week. And, we did that for about 3 months and we saw several people profess faith in Jesus. We encountered our first manifestation of a demon, which is a whole nother story that God has really been working in our lives over the last 4 years, connected to some of the spiritual warfare stuff. But in those 3 months, I feel like we came away from it with this, as much as we were laboring and as much as we were sharing the gospel, which was a lot. At the end of 3 months, we realized, man, we could do this the rest of our lives, and everybody in Utah would never hear the gospel. And something's got to change, and that made a shift. That was like a little shift for us where we were like, all right, at this point, we're going to go meet with as many existing believers as we can find and cast vision. And try to find out what God's doing, and see if we can find other people to labor in the harvest with, to labor making disciples with. And I think through those 3 months, we probably picked up 3 or 4 laborers, and got to that place again. We're just like, this won't accomplish the task, We we could do this the rest of our lives and still everybody wouldn't have an opportunity to hear the gospel. So I think that was a real shift for us at that point, because we realized, and I think this is just a big learning point for us in general, is that we're actually not God's answer to the brutal facts of lostness. It's actually the priesthood of the believer. The body of Christ is the answer. It's not one individual or one unit or one team. It's actually the body of Christ. And so that really, I would say, whereas I feel like we had a vision for multiplication before that, that was really where we realized that apart from really multiplying, that we weren't going to, we wouldn't see what we wanted to see happen and what God wanted to see happen, honestly, because it's his heart, really. So.
And what was happening for you, Cassie? What was life like in those early days?
Again, still in that same season, really small kids. We were trying to learn how to homeschool because all of our kids were learning together along with the, chasing around the small babies. But we were learning. I feel like it was just a huge learning process for me and for these other wives, and just how we can serve our husbands and just live on mission together as a family. And so we would rotate with the guys, going out and sharing the gospel, bringing our kids sometimes if we were in, a little bit safer neighborhood. I really wrestled a lot when we first moved here, thinking, I didn't like Utah. It was really overwhelming to me. There was so much lostness, and and it was scary for me as a mom moving our kids out here. And, we heard tons of stories about just a lot of, just the darkness and spiritual warfare. And, so I think God just taught us a lot as a family about how to deal with that. And just, daily discipleship with our kids. So just I feel like there was a lot going on in my heart, and just I feel like there's just been a ton of growth overall since we moved here to now.
Like, there's something there too, Steve. You asked her what was that first season like for her, and I heard what she said, and I agree with everything she said. There was also another side to that first season that she didn't just share, and it was the pace that I was running.
Okay.
And I would say it was a really big, probably 6 to 8 months in living out here. We had some really, people that we look up to, shared a simple illustration with us that really connected to our hearts about how we were living, and particularly how I was leading. As you heard Cassie say, family on mission. Well, the reality was this illustration was like driving a speedboat, and the people that are actually trying to get in that you want in the boat are actually hanging off the back, and they're hitting the waves, and they can't even get in the boat. And that person just looked at me and Cassie and said, "Matt, you need to sell that boat, and you need to get one that goes at the pace of the family." And that was, that rocked me, honestly, Steve. And it was a life-changing, that was a life-changing moment, I think, just for our family, and even how I viewed my leadership in my role in the family.
I'm just remembering a season in our lives just like that.
That season was also really interesting. We moved out specifically identifying as a missionary team, and as we were laboring, 6 months, we're meeting together weekly. We're gathering together. We're basically doing the same type of discipleship that we would do with new believers when they came to faith, so that we could learn. And in that process, God just made it really clear, as we're looking at a simple tool called the church circle, and we're saying, "Hey, we're actually doing all this together. What does that say about who we are?" And that was significant, because once we saw that just biblically, we just said, "Hey, we're a church," and that season, we actually went and pretty soon after we identified as a church, we appointed some elders, just walked through the process biblically and appointed some elders. And then my dad actually got really sick. And, basically almost overnight, he lost function in 3 limbs. Anyways, so we left with a one-way ticket to go stay with them and didn't come back for 2 months personally. So that was a really I think a very significant season as we were just pressing in, really caring for my dad, caring for my mom in that season. While we had been here and the work was going, and I think that's one of the ways that actually God used to bring some light. I think to help us see a little more clearly in connection to what it actually will take for the task and even the pace, because again, we were completely taken out of it for 2 months, and then had to re-enter into it. So what I discovered when we re-entered, I knew this even before we left, the people that God had connected us to, that we were laboring with, some of the strongest leaders that I've ever honestly worked with. Before we left, they were looking to me as their leader. And then we were gone and we came back and they were leading, and I don't just mean leading. They were doing an amazing job. Yeah. So one of the things, that we were seeing in the field, and this started within probably 3 weeks of being out here. I referenced it earlier, but within 3 weeks of being out here, we had a demon that manifested in a guy, that we had professed faith in Jesus, and we're beginning to start discipling him. And first time we'd ever encountered that. And it was, to say that it was life-changing is probably an understatement. And honestly, I feel like what we saw the next season, you could probably stretch it out 1.5 years, where looking back on it, it seems pretty clear what God was doing. In the moment, we had no idea, it's almost like God said, hey, I'm working this way and I want to work this way. And then the whole next 1.5 years, 2 years, he was showing us the barriers in our hearts. I say we encountered a lot of demonic activity, a lot, and we weren't seeing people delivered, and we were sharing the gospel, 50 to 100 times a week, and people weren't coming to faith. There were some people that professed faith, and there were some baptisms, and but nobody really early on in that season sustained, if that makes sense. And in the process, we were also we started out trying to training anybody that we could. And we had some opportunities in the first season. We were out here to do some trainings, some simple, basic, how do you share the gospel? And when somebody believes, how do you begin to disciple them? And we met some other people through that process that we began to labor with in the harvest. And ultimately later, God connected us with one of those people that we met early on in the training, and we ended up teaming with them for a season as well. So I would say, as I think back to that first season, I remember months where we shared the gospel 300-400 times, and we didn't see a single person that was even interested in the gospel. Yeah. So Cassie just reminded me, she was encouraging me to share another, entry strategy that we tried. We kind of stumbled upon it, honestly. Me and another brother went to one of the Mormon gatherings on Sunday. We were just trying to connect with people in our neighborhood, and they're geographically, they have to gather with people that they're geographically connected to. They have boundaries. Mm. And so basically, if we went and gathered with them, that would be everybody that lived around us, mm-hmm. That was LDS. And so we went to do that, and we happened to be there on the first Sunday of the month, which we realized was their testimony Sunday, where anybody in that congregation could get up and share their testimony about Jesus. Mm. And so over the next month, as we were praying, we just said, hey, I think there's an opportunity here, potentially to get up and just share our testimony about Jesus, And so we actually, probably for the next 6 months or so, 6-8 months, we would strategically target different, we went to our own and did that, and we got some follow-up contacts from that. And then there were other areas that we targeted where we would go out and we would prayer walk the area, for 3 or 4 weeks before we actually went and gathered on that Sunday. And then we'd get up and share and try to get follow-ups from that. And there's some relationships that have sustained even from through that process as well. But it was an interesting season to say the least. So.
So that first season was a lot of heart lessons and a lot of gospeling, but very little progress in terms of fruit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What happened next?
The next piece to the story would be after we came back from my dad being sick, we walked through that next season with those amazing leaders. And just through that process, God just put it on our hearts to actually exit from that town that we were in and relocate to another town in Utah that ended up being about an hour south of where we had moved out to and where we were presently living. And in that process, he connected us with another brother who we had met at one of the trainings that we did within the first 3 months we were out here. And that brother was in the process. He had been out here for a decade, and he had churches, two churches actually, that met in campus buildings in different parts of 2 different counties in Utah. And God had actually moved in their hearts and brought them to the place where he realized they weren't actually reaching people. And so he did something pretty extreme and sold their buildings, and they decentralized into homes. Well, we happened to, in that relationship with him, we were able to move down for a season and just begin to team with them and work towards helping them build out lay some foundation, build in some DNA. And honestly, God, not just, so in that season, God really began to work in the place that we had been. So that it was, I think that was one of our big lessons that we learned. The fruit was actually coming. I think there's a desire for me personally to see the fruit myself and for it to come from me, but what we saw happen, and it's still happening, was that once we left that place, there's more fruit than there ever has been.
So the lesson was we've got to get Matt away for the breakthrough to come. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty humbling, but yes. Yeah.
And so what did that breakthrough look like?
Maybe 4 months after we left, where they actually, it just so happened to be, they saw a lady delivered from a demon, give her life to Jesus. And within a probably 3-week time span, they probably had, 8 to 10 people give their life to Jesus, get baptized, start following him. So much so that they actually had to start another church. And, the one church that was there actually multiplied it or reproduced into 2 churches. Then we moved down to start working with this new team. And I would say probably that was one of the more difficult seasons just personally for us as a family. So it was at the beginning of 2020. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was at the beginning of 2020. And we moved down and, within just a few weeks of being here, there was a situation in one of the church gatherings in the home where a lady had a demon that manifested in her. And by God's grace, she was delivered. The demon was cast out of her. She was set free. She said she felt like God wanted her to go share the story with the other church. So we went down there that evening. She shared the story with that church. And in the process, demons manifested in some other people in that church. But they weren't delivered. But what ended up happening, and this was, we had moved down there to work with these people, but we only really knew probably 2 of the families. And so none of them really knew us that well. And in that process, there was a lot of slander. There was a lot of accusation just about me personally, as and Cassie. And it was a really difficult season, and then on top of that, COVID hit and really, put a damper as far as, what we could tell, put a damper on some things. But we pressed in. We saw that as an opportunity to press outward, with hitting. And even work towards, pushing authority and responsibility down to the people in smaller units and smaller groups and smaller churches. And so we moved in early 2020, and then starting from July 2020 to now, we've seen a little over 50 baptisms through the churches here. And just since January of this year, there's been over 30. So I feel like what we're seeing is I think it's the fruit of years of a lot of prayer. Mm-hmm. A lot of people sowing the gospel here in the area that we're living. Mm-hmm. I also think it's fruit of what God was doing to people's hearts in COVID. Mm-hmm. And then we also had an earthquake out here right after COVID hit in Salt Lake City. And I think God was just shaking people's hearts, you know? And so we've seen a significant increase in the level of receptivity in the harvest in the last year. I mean, significant, to the point where 2 weeks ago, I had 2 gospel conversations in the same day. And this was the first time this had ever happened, but both people initiated follow-up. Like usually it's us initiating the follow-up, you know? And so that's happening. But then what we also started seeing was not just increased receptivity in the harvest, but we were also seeing God just start activating believers. Yes. And in that process, so we came down, we worked with this one team for a season that had 2 churches started out, you know, and then in the process, they started another church. And then in the fall of 2020, God connected us with another couple they're amazing. And they had moved out here with a vision to start a church. And so we started working with them at the beginning of this past year and helping them, you know, with foundation and DNA and some things like that. And man, God's just been, it's been really interesting to see, but he's in all of these relationships and the different churches. I mean, those baptisms that I was just referring to, they're spread out. So it's not like those baptisms are coming through 1 or 2 people. I mean, if you were to, you know, look at who all's led people to faith and started making disciples and baptizing others, it's a lot of people, you know, in those churches, and it's spread out. So it's really, I don't know, it's just really neat to see what God's doing, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's now 6 churches that are spread across 4 counties, you know, and they're networked together, pursuing the vision to see every place and every people, you know, in Utah reached with the gospel. So it's been exciting. So also been really hard. So some of the hardest seasons of our lives.
So what's changed in you?
My heart's grown a lot. You know, I started out when we were living in North Carolina, and, you know, like I shared before, God just gave me this task that he wanted me to do of praying. And so I feel like I've grown a lot in that. There's been seasons where I feel like I've been more faithful and less faithful. But I've seen the importance that one thing is. I feel like God has really taught me the importance of being vulnerable with the church, being vulnerable with my husband, being vulnerable with our kids, because relationships are really messy and I'm a mess, but it's really, really worth it. So I feel like that's been one thing that I've really learned a lot. The importance of a healthy marriage. I feel like we just have been through a really difficult season, and just watching my husband go from a place of, you know, I feel like something's wrong with me. I don't know where I fit in the ministry world, to just really being very secure in how God's made him and the vision that he's put on his heart, and just my part in that, and just how much just a little bit of encouragement goes such a long way for me as a wife to my husband. And then I feel like God's given me some really interesting spiritual giftings that this last church that we've been a part of for the last 6 months or so. And they've just really encouraged me in walking those giftings out and how to do that, and how to do that in faith. You heard Matt say earlier that he's been activating believers here, and it's true. He is lighting people up here. It's just crazy. And he's bringing believers to Utah, like putting this place specifically on their hearts to come and to do ministry. We've met people from anywhere from Ohio to Hawaii. And all points in between are coming here because God's called them. And it's just been really neat to see, how the body is working together and just being united in what God has for them. And just, I don't know, just that significance piece. Like every gift is significant, and God wants to use his people to carry out his purposes.
Man, I just have grown more secure in my identity in Christ and who he's made me to be. And I think it has flown directly out of, deep abiding in Jesus. But it's also come through a lot of, to get more secure in your identity, oftentimes the insecurity is exposed in the process. So I feel like that has just been, the last season for me. And I feel like one of the passages that God has really used multiple times just in my life over the last 4 years has been from the mouth of Jesus in John chapter 12, where the Greeks come and they're seeking him, and he turns to his disciples and he says, "Truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." And I think one of the lessons that God's been teaching me is that security in my identity has come through abiding in Jesus, dying to self, and that the real spiritual fruit that we're seeing, honestly, is coming through death. It's really coming through death, just like it has to us, right? That's how it came to us, was through the death of Jesus and his life now being manifested through us. We're carrying his death in our bodies, as Paul would say, so that his life can be manifested to others,
The fruit of it is, after probably many years, not just your ministry, but many years of hard soil, you've seen the first green shoots, new disciples, new churches.
Yeah, and I think there's another brother out here that's been using the language of first fruits, and I think it speaks to exactly what we're seeing happening. And it's first fruits. The fruit's actually coming from it's coming from a lot. It's coming through a lot of people. It's not just coming. Actually, most of it's not coming through us, which is super humbling. It's really encouraging. But I think I think first fruits is a really good way to, that feels like that's what we're seeing right now, and interestingly enough, we're getting ready to, in the most fruitful season we've ever been a part of out here, God's calling us out, and we're, getting ready to.
Is this part of the pattern that in order for the breakthroughs to come, Matt, you've got to leave?
I think there's probably something to that. I think that's the multiplication only comes through release. I think it's connected to that principle.
And so what's next for you guys? What's the next hill to climb, the next challenge?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of moving to New York City. So we are relocating from today about 3.5 weeks to New York City, where God's putting a vision on our heart to go pursue the multiplication of disciples, churches, and leaders in the New York metro area, in and among the peoples there, because the peoples are there. And we see it as one of the biggest gaps in North America, particularly in the U.S., and just in the same way that drew us to Utah, because it was a significant gap in the U.S., percent of evangelicals to total population. Now we're being drawn, to another gap in the New York metro area.
Well, if you're enjoying the Movements podcast, why not leave a review wherever you get your podcast, or spread the word on social media, or just recommend it to a friend. It would really help. I'm Steve Addison for the Movements podcast.